Namaskar, this is Akhilesh Bhargava. Welcome to Tit-Bits on Business and Finance with me. With India's COVID cases crossing the 2 million mark and they continuing to rise, the pandemic continues, the lockdown continues, and contraction of the economy continues, we still have to hit a peak in all these matters. At such a time, India's economic and humanitarian crisis is yet to ebb. We need to listen to the advice of some experts, and let's talk about that today. Dr. Manmohan Singh, India's former Prime Minister, India's former Finance Minister, while talking to BBC, said that India needs to implement 3 steps in order to restore financial order and financial stability in the system. The first step, he says, is that direct cash assistance is needed in order to protect livelihood and to retain spending power. Direct cash assistance at the moment has not gone to the urban sector, it has not gone to business firms, and such kind of assistance is needed. And as he said, spending power, in other words, demand will get restored. The second step, he says, is that there has to be government-backed guarantee schemes in order to make available capital to businesses. The fact is that business capital, business funds have depleted considerably, and someone will have to give money to them in order to restart their businesses. Banks are not willing lenders, and what is needed is a government-backed credit scheme. The government has come up with such a scheme to the tune of 3 lakh crores for the MSME sector only, but Dr. Singh thinks that we need it in much larger volumes. And the third step, he says, is institutional autonomy is needed in India in order to fix the financial sector. India's financial sector continues to slump. It is a doddering one. And according to him, institutional autonomy, which is autonomy of the RBI in true sense, is needed in order to fix the center. These are the 3 steps that he suggests in order to restore India's financial stability and order. He further observes and says that there is going to be a deep and prolonged slowdown in the Indian economy. He says that is inevitable. He then makes a very pertinent and interesting remark and point, and he says that what we are facing is a humanitarian crisis has caused an economic crisis. We cannot forget that it has been a humanitarian crisis. It is a health crisis after all, and we thus cannot only look at it as an economic crisis from the angle of policies or statistics, models, data, etc. We need to also see it from a sentimental perspective. The humanitarian angle is often forgotten, and Dr. Singh makes a timely remark here. He further says that borrowing is needed in order to fund these kind of direct cash transfers that he's talking about. The government apparently doesn't have the money, and therefore, according to him, the government must borrow money and pass it on to all those who need it in a correct manner. Dr. Singh further says that even if the government was to spend another 10% of India's GDP in order to cater to our health, military and economic challenges, then it is justified and we must do it. He then says that do not bother about the high debt GDP ratio that will happen because of additional borrowing by the government. That is not a matter to be bothered about, because according to him, if additional borrowing and spending by the government saves lives, saves livelihood and boosts our economic growth, then it is certainly justified and we must do it. Our former Prime Minister further remarks that monetary policy has proved to be ineffective in tackling with this present crisis. It certainly needs to be supported by fiscal measures in a big way. Monetary policy in itself is not helping, he says that. Dr. Manmohan Singh further says that if needed and as a last resort, if India needs to print additional currency, money, it must do that. It must not hesitate. After all, lives, livelihood and the economy is at stake. And as he rightly points out, it's also a humanitarian crisis. He also warns that with India being deeply globally linked and the global economy having been dented, we are going to also face crises similar to what the globe is facing. In fact, crisis will come to India from the global centers abroad, and we need to be bothered about it. So these were the remarks and advice that Dr. Singh had in respect of dealing with the present economic crisis that we face. The second advice comes from Dr. Abhijeet Banerjee, the freshly minted Nobel Prize winner of Indian origin. He says that India should print money in order to fund welfare measures. He is not averse to printing money. He emphasizes that for funding welfare measures, if we have to print additional money, we should not hesitate. He points out that many nations have done that and India should not be afraid of printing additional money. It is this printing of additional money which is a bone of contention, a point of controversy and severe difference of opinion in India at the moment. The advice finally then comes from Dr. Rajan. While speaking at the Global Markets Forum, Dr. Rajan says that policy in India should be focused in order to protect the economy instead of being bothered about the concerns of rating agencies. The fact is that Indian policy making has been extremely sensitive to rating agencies and a potential downgrade by the global rating agencies. According to him, the focus of the policy should not be on the rating agencies and it has to be purely focused in order to protect the Indian economy. A point we think is needed. The government needs to consider it. Further, Dr. Rajan says that India will need to adopt measures and that measures obviously may not sound fiscally responsible in the short term. So he says that we must tell international investors that after the pandemic is over, India will come back to fiscal responsibility. That should be reassuring not just to investors but also, according to us, reassuring to rating agencies. Dr. Rajan then says that we need to focus on stressed and viable sectors in the economy. We need to see that they are funded. We need to see that those enterprises which are viable are not allowed to die only for want of funds. So according to him, the focus of credit delivery should be on stressed sectors and viable sectors, viable enterprises. He then makes an interesting point, which is that India needs to protect its economic capabilities. In other words, during this pandemic time, during this economic crisis, we might lose our economic capabilities, we might lose enterprises which add to India's economic strength. He says those must be protected. He then says that the government needs to spend. According to him, the cash spending by the government so far by way of a fiscal stimulus has been a mere 1% of the Indian economy and not more. According to him, the ball is in the court of the government to spend and it must spend. It is pertinent to link this remark with what Dr. Singh said. Dr. Singh said that even if we have to spend another 10% of our GDP, we must do that because that will protect health, it will protect our borders, it will protect our economy, it will protect livelihood and businesses, and it would be justified. So what are the key and common issues that emerged from this advice and these observations of these three experts? The first one, as Dr. Singh points out, and we often forget, it's a humanitarian crisis apart from being an economic crisis. Health is a humanitarian crisis, of course, and even not having income in a family or in a business also becomes a humanitarian crisis after a point. We need to look at this crisis from both the angles and suitable policy measures will need to be initiated. The second is, India doesn't need to fear rating agencies. India needs to spend, and for that, whether it borrows or whether it prints money, it will need to exercise one or both the options. The only way to get out of the economic crisis and to restart growth is to spend, and the government will need to do it. If rating agencies threaten that because of India's fiscal deficit rising beyond a point, India could have a rating downgrade, so be it. We need not be bothered. After all, as Dr. Singh says, we need to protect lives, we need to protect livelihood, we need to also boost our economic growth, and the need of the hour is that. Dr. Rajan very correctly says that investors need to be told, rating agencies need to be told that this is a short-term phenomena. After the pandemic is over, India will get back to responsible fiscal policies which it has always adhered to. And with that in mind, we need to spend. The fact of the matter is that the Indian government has not spent. The stimulus has spent just 1% of the GDP so far and not that 10% as has been claimed by the government. We need to spend more, and even if it means any other additional 10% spending of the GDP, so be it, as Dr. Singh rightly points out. After all, it's the government which will need to spend. A parting remark here would be that this is an extraordinary crisis that India faces. Extraordinary on the economic front, extraordinary on the humanitarian front, and that will need extraordinary measures. We do not need to fear from taking them. We do not need to shy away from them. After all, as a former RBI Governor Dr. Rajan had pointed out, in war there are no principles. Any principle is a correct principle. In other words, we are facing such a situation, and let us not try to stick to principles of fiscal deficit, etc., and prevent the government from spending, because if it doesn't, the crisis will be far more prolonged. This is Akhilesh Bhargava signing off till we meet again. Namaskar.
Now be the first to know about the latest updates on our new news app. Go on your Android or iOS, search for HW News Network. Download our app, choose the language you prefer to get updates in, and be up to date with the latest news.
If you like this video, please share it, and we would love to hear your comments in the comments section down here. Also, please do like our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter to get minute-to-minute news updates. For more such shows and videos, well, subscribe to our YouTube channel.